He was inducted into the US Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2000. In 2004, he received the Order of Jamaica. A month later, he was inducted into the British Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Please give a generous round of applause for a legendary creative entrepreneur, Mr. Chris Blackwell. Mr. Blackwell, it's a real honor to have you. Thank you for taking your time to come and share your life story with us. If you could just start off by giving us a little bit of backstory into your life. You were born and raised in Jamaica. I know the other day I asked you a very ignorant question because the perception that I have is that Jamaicans are generally black. Tell us about your upbringing.
Well, white Jamaicans are a rare species, I must say. I actually was born in London, and I went back to Jamaica when I was 6 months old because my mother's family had been in Jamaica for many, many years. So I grew up in Jamaica, and I went to school for a little bit in Jamaica. And then I went back to England for school. But I wasn't a stellar student, so I actually left school at about 15. And then came back to Jamaica, then went back to England for a little bit to do some more studying, and then I was invited to a party. Actually, it was a very glamorous party. It was a party given by Mike Todd and Elizabeth Taylor. And at this party, I met the person who was the governor of Jamaica, and he offered me a job as an ADC, which is basically a gopher. It has a fancy title, but it's basically, you go and get the car here or take them there and things like that. And so I went back to Jamaica and worked with the governor of Jamaica for a bit.
You also had a stint, I heard, you were a real estate agent at some point. At which stage did you discover your passion for music?
Well, I always loved music because my father used to play at a deafening volume from the time I was as early as I can remember. He used to play Wagner, Puccini, Brahms, Strauss. So my early music I listened to was classical music. So I think it's a good way to start learning music.
It's always so difficult to condense such an amazing life story into a couple of minutes. But how did you move from discovering your passion for music to building Island Records, which was the biggest independent record label in the UK?
Well, I used to go to shows in Jamaica, and I decided there was one singer I thought was really good, sounded a lot like an American singer called Brooke Benton. So I just decided to record him. So I recorded him, and his record went to #1 in Jamaica. And then I recorded somebody else, and their record went to #1 in Jamaica. Then I recorded somebody else, and their record went to #1 in Jamaica. So I've never done any better than that, incidentally. But I just love the whole process. It was right at the very beginning of Jamaican music, Jamaicans making their own music. So it really evolved very quickly. And after a bit, I found that I was making what to me was better sounding records, but they were starting to sell less. And some of the guys who were the sound system guys in Jamaica, they started making their own records, and their records were selling much, much better than mine, and were really great records. It's somebody called Sir Coxsone, Duke Reid, Sir Coxsone, and King Edward. So there were the three sort of royalty of Jamaican sound system guys and record producers. And so in 1962, independence came to Jamaica, and I thought, well, in view of how I'm packaged, I'd probably be better off going to England. So I spoke to all my competitors, all these guys, and said, look, I'm going to go to England and start up there. give me your records to release in England. So pretty much all of them gave me their records to start with in England. So that's how I started.
Just take us back a little bit and paint us a picture of how Jamaica was back then. I mean, we've got very romantic ideas of, you know, what the social scene was like. What were your experiences? What are your memories? Just for us to, you know, to take us back in time and to paint a picture of what popular culture was like back then.
Well, popular culture was pretty much all from America. There was, on the radio stations, incidentally, on the radio stations until about 15 years ago, they never played Jamaican music. I remember very early on when I had my first records out, I was trying to get them on Jamaican radio. And so I went to this shop, which was a big department store. And I asked them why they don't sponsor any program which would play Jamaican music. And they said, well, we don't want to sponsor any program like that because we don't want the people who like that music to come into our shop because they're not going to buy anything, they're just going to shoplift. That gives you a bit of an idea of what the social thing was like in Jamaica. Let's see, what else? Yes, in general, the music that was successful in Jamaica, in fact, the most successful, when I left Jamaica in 1962, this is going to be hard to believe, the most successful record ever in Jamaica was The Student Prince. You ever heard of The Student Prince? Yeah. Has anybody ever heard of The Student Prince? Mario Lanza. It was like it was a movie, and this was a soundtrack for it, and it was huge. The other people who were big in Jamaica were country singers. Jim Reeves was huge, and it was very sort of not very exciting music that you would hear on the radio. Now, what the street people listened to was what was in America at that time called race music, which was like a kind of jazz music. It mainly came from St. Louis, New Orleans, Chicago, New York and stuff. In fact, early on I used to go up to New York and I used to buy records and I'd scratch off the labels on them so nobody would know what they were and take them back and sell them to the sound system guys. Because the sound system guys, their whole business was based on people booking them. Like people would book them for a dance, and they would have they would turn up and they would have the liquor concession because they were all had sort of liquor wholesalers, and people would pay them to come and take the door. And of course, the more interesting records they had, the more popular they were. So when I found anything new that I thought would work, I would buy it. It used to cost 43 cents, and I'd bring it back and sell them for about $100.
So you've always been an entrepreneur.
I guess if you call it that, yeah.
I would say that you are the definitive creative entrepreneur, and it's not always easy to be a creative on the one hand and also to kind of inject your entrepreneurial flair into what you do. And I think that we haven't really focused on the entrepreneurial side of the creative business. And I think you've managed to merge the two pretty well. When did you go into film, for instance?
Well, there's two situations in film which were important in my life. One was that I was friends with Ian Fleming. So when I say I was friends with him, my mother was friends with him, and I knew him very well. And when Dr. No was going to be filmed in Jamaica, he got me the job as the local guide. So I found accommodations, transportation, locations, all that kind of thing. And the money I made from that actually was what I took and started Island Records in England. So that was my first film thing. And then the next one was a friend of mine called Perry Hensel, another Jamaican rare species. He was going to make this film based on the life of a gangster that existed in Jamaica in the 40s. And he called that film The Harder They Come. And so I was involved in that film. I helped back it. And then also Jimmy Cliff was signed to me, was one of my first artists, and I put Jimmy Cliff in the film, so that was really my second.
We saw some visuals earlier on of some of the album covers that you've been responsible for. What role would you say that design has played in establishing Island Records as one of the premier record labels in the world?
Well, I think in our case it was very important because I gave a lot of importance to album graphics, a tremendous amount of importance, more than most. And in fact, I can tell you the example of what one artist that I signed, a girl called Melissa Etheridge, which I started working with in 1985. It was, much later. And I said to my art director, somebody who'd worked with me since 1969, I said, look, this girl is really, really good. I think she could be a big star. I want you to do a cover for me that, really looks like, the coming of somebody really important. And he did this album cover, and it was fantastic. It's more fantastic than the record. So I rang Melissa and said, something, you're going to have to go back and redo the record. And she was a little shocked, but it worked, because when she did redo it, it was improved a lot and sort of matched the graphic. Because I think they have to match. There's no point having a great graphic and nothing so great inside it.
Sure. You were very instrumental in the establishment of Bob Marley as an international musician. In fact, the two of you, I would say, were very instrumental in putting reggae on an international stage. Tell us about how you met Bob Marley and how you created such a huge international success.
Well, from early on I'd been releasing Bob Marley's records, though I never met him. I released the first record of his probably in about 1963, which was called One Cup of Coffee. And it was, as I said earlier on, I represented various producers in Jamaica. So his first record was made by somebody called Leslie Kong, and then for a long time he was recorded by Coxsone. And Coxsone is really the person who made Jamaican music. He's the heart and soul of Jamaican music. And he produced the early Bob Marley records, and I released some of them in England. And I loved them, but I never met Bob. And Bob and the Wailers were kind of rebels in that they were just totally dissatisfied with the way the system in Jamaica went of recording, because there were no royalties paid in Jamaica. There was like a fee paid. And so when they sold a lot of records, they never really got any more money. So they were known in the Jamaican music business in Jamaica to be, pariah. Don't go near them because they're just a lot of trouble, etc. So flash forward now to 1972. He had come to England to do some music for a film, because he'd met Johnny Nash. Johnny Nash was a popular American singer at the time. He'd come down to Jamaica. He'd heard some of Bob Marley's music and started recording him, and invited him to come to Scandinavia and work on a film. The film collapsed, and so Bob and the Wailers were all stuck in London. Somebody rang me and said, did I want to meet Bob Marley and the Wailers? I said, sure. So I actually met them in my office in London. And they were, as I say, they were stranded in England. They were broke. And I remember, I heard they were downstairs. They came in the office, and they just lit up the office. The charisma all of them had, because all of them were really strong. Peter Tosh, Bunny, and Bob. And it's one thing to have charisma when people know your name or people have seen you in a movie or heard you, but when you're virtually unknown and completely broken in a foreign country, it's pretty hard for that to happen. But they had tremendous charisma. So I sat with them and talked with them, and basically worked out a deal with them to make a record. So I asked them how much they thought it would cost them to make. I said that Island was really an album company more than a singles company, so I wanted an album. How much did you think it would cost to make the album? They told me. So I gave them a check for to go and make the record. And everybody said, you're completely crazy. You're never going to see the money. They're going to disappear. They've got a bad reputation, etc. But I felt when I met with them, the only way to establish a working relationship would be to show them my trust. And a few months later, I went out to Jamaica, and I went to their shop, because they had a little shop. And Rita Marley, Bob's widow, she was there. And I said, I'm here. I wanted to see if they'd recorded anything. I was kind of a little nervous. And so they came and picked me up, took me to the studio, and I heard this record, which eventually came out, was called Catch a Fire. And it was an incredible record. It was one of the best moments, definitely, for me.
Sure. So your investment definitely paid off.
Yes, definitely.
Now, U2 was also one of the bands that contributed to the success of Island Records. What is it that you saw in them that the rest of the UK wasn't seeing? Because I'm told that they were rejected by many other record labels in the UK before you signed them on.
I saw them, they did a performance for me at a little club in South London. Actually, it was set up because Bob Marley was playing a concert in South London, a place called Crystal Palace. And so they set up this show in a little tiny club. And I went to see them, and there was about 4 of us, and I would say there was probably a total of 11 people in the audience. And they were just like they are now, in a sense. I mean, they gave everything. You would think that they were playing for 100,000 people or something. They just came out, and I can't honestly tell you that I heard their music at that time. I didn't really, it wasn't my kind of music. My music is more bass and drums, and they sounded a little rinky-dink to me, honestly. But I loved them as people. They just projected to me. You could see their passion. And hold on. And so I signed them, and I can honestly tell you that I did absolutely nothing towards U2's career, other than signing them and telling my company that I thought they were great, that they knew more about what they were doing than the rest of us did, and we should just really support them, support their vision, support what they wanted to do. And so that's really what we did. But other than that, nothing. There was never any. I'd listen to their music. When they'd finished a record, I'd listen to it. But I'd never wanted to change anything. They really forged their own career, which has been absolutely amazing.
I suppose to do what you've done in your life successfully, you have to have an eye for aesthetic. You've got to be able to distinguish between something that's got star potential and something that's mediocre. What do you think distinguishes excellent, whether it's design or talent, versus something mediocre?
Well, I guess it's a matter of your own taste, what resonates for you. But it's the main thing is I look behind what it is to the people, because you have to be smart, firstly. Nobody's going to have a long-term career unless they're smart, because there's so many things thrown at you. As soon as you have any success, then there are as many people trying to pull you down as push you up. So you have to be able to sort of work your way through those minefields, and you can only do that if you're very smart. That's one of it. The other one is how passionate they are about what they're doing. You try and analyze, why are they in it? Are they in it because they want to get girls? Are they in it because they want to make music and have a long-term career? What is it? So, you make a judgment on that.
Sure. I spoke about some of the accolades that you've received in your life. Do you ever sit and think, wow, I've had an incredible life, and I'm pretty cool? I'm
always thinking forward. Always. I never think backwards, I'm always thinking forward.
Your induction into the USA Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, was that one of your career highlights?
Technically, yes. But the career highlights have more been when, like the one I described you, when I heard Bob's record, when Cat Stevens played me Tea for the Tillerman. When you've heard different records that you've been working, either working with the records or working with the artists, the highlights are those moments. When U2 played me Joshua Tree.
But what did that moment mean to you? When you sat back and thought about it, what did it say to you about the work that you've done in your life?
Actually, that's the first time I've seen it then, and I was so nervous at the time, I can't remember anything about it.
Come on, I want you to say more. I want you to acknowledge it.
No, I really,
that was an affirmation from the world saying that you've done an you've contributed significantly to the music business.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was great.
Do you think that it's very difficult for entrepreneurs, or for creators to become entrepreneurs? And does it take a special balancing skill to get that balance right? Because a lot of creatives are just creative and they don't necessarily focus on the business side of things. Do you think it takes a special type of person to create that balance?
Well, it depends a bit on your background. I think if you left school very early, you have to hustle, and as a hustler, you kind of you have to sort of think of ideas, and so I guess that's the creative side, and then you've got to sort of make it work and make your business grow. So I think if on the other hand you have qualified highly in the subjects that you've wanted to focus on, then you can go and get a job. I personally was, and actually probably still am, unemployable, because I'm not, I don't have any sort of qualifications, and I have my own opinions on things, etc. So I never really had a job, so I had to give myself a job, really. So I think it depends.
South Africa is such an incredibly exciting place to live in today, because obviously, things have opened up for us. There's just so much possibility, and we're in the process of trying to define ourselves as a nation and to create an identity that is ours. And there are a lot of young people like myself who have dreams of establishing creative enterprises. But I mean, it's one thing to dream, and it's very easy to daydream and imagine it. But it's another to actually turn that into a material reality and to make it happen. So how do you move from making the decision that this is what I want to do to execution? There's a process, and what needs to happen in between those two, in that journey, what needs to happen?
Well, it depends, you see. If it's something where you have to go out and get finance, then you essentially have a partner, and they may have a different time frame where they want a return on their investment. If it's something that you're doing yourself and you love doing it and you're just growing a little bit all the time, but you really love what you're doing, that's the best. I think that's an incredibly fortunate life to have, most of which I've had like that. So I haven't really been in a rush because I just loved what I was doing. I was first offered to buy Island Records in 1969, and they offered me what I thought was an unbelievable amount of money. But I remember it was the same, because I'd read that the Dorchester Hotel in London had sold for what was the same that they'd offered me. And I thought, I can't believe this is worth the same as the Dorchester Hotel. This is unbelievable. But I didn't sell it because I felt, I really enjoyed what I was doing. I felt that that if I had got cold, then if you have a job working for somebody and you get cold, the people tend to lose confidence in what you're doing, and then I'd never really gone for what were the regular, regular type artists or regular type projects. So I felt I wouldn't really have been able to operate as I had, and I loved what I was doing, and to give up what I really loved to get some money for it, I didn't. I just loved what I was doing. So.
Sure. And tell us about Palm Pictures.
Palm Pictures I started in 1999, and it was, I did eventually sell Island Records in 1989. I sold it to Polygram, and the first 4 years I was fine working with them because they didn't want me to come to work. So they were paying me a lot of money actually to stay away. Now and again they just asked me to come and take a picture or do something like that, but they didn't really want me involved, so I started another business, which was something which I always wanted to do, which was small hotels. So I'd started something called Island Outpost. And then unfortunately, my wife became ill in 1996, and so I went back to New York with her, and in between being in the hospital and stuff, I started to go back in the office, which was a huge mistake. So within a very short period of time, that's where I said I was unemployable. In a very short period of time, I was at odds with the people. Of course, they now own the company. So it's like you sell a house, the people have decorated the house how they like, and you go into the house and said, well, this is terrible, this is awful, you should change this, change that. So obviously we fell out a little bit. And particularly, I really believed in DVD as a platform, actually. It's still not really used as how I see it will be used, but it's starting to be. And so I wanted to start that, and they wouldn't let me start that. So I fell out with them, and then I started Palm Pictures so I can start a DVD business.
And what are some of the successes that you've enjoyed within that realm?
Well, we haven't had a lot of successes. We've had some minor successes, but nothing like what we're talking about here at Island Records. It's been much more of a struggle nowadays. I think it's, firstly, in the 60s, everybody was kind of cowboys. Now, it's much more competitive, much more professional. It's much harder. But I enjoy it, but it's a harder struggle.
So what would you say is your personal vision now? Where are you in your life? And what is it that you want for yourself now and into the future?
Well, I've been doing this so long, it's like breathing for me. So it's not really like a career or I just, that's what I do. So I'm still doing the same thing, looking for something interesting. Same thing.
Well, South Africa is a very interesting place. So,
I agree.
I'm sure something will come up in your stay here. My last question for you is, as I mentioned earlier on, that we have such an incredible country and we're still in the process of trying to negotiate an identity. When I spoke to you the other day and I asked you what afterwards felt like a really dumb question, which was, how do you get to be Jamaican as a white guy? What is your take on identity, and what advice would you give to South Africans who are trying to negotiate a new identity?
Well, I think a lot of things have broken down everywhere. You have you have a black woman as Secretary of State in the United States. That's something which would be inconceivable 30, 40 years ago. So I think a lot of things have broken down. I think the main thing is, to believe in yourself and follow your heart. I think that's absolutely the most important thing. Because if you can enjoy what you're doing, that's the main thing. Sometimes people are sort of rushing, trying to grab at something, but you should really just try and find something you do. It can be however simple, and just do it to the best you can do it and get some satisfaction out of that. And sometimes it'll lead to riches, and sometimes it might not to the same degree, but in any event, I think you have a better chance of enjoying your life.